Yes, so in terms of new business, we have developed those descriptions for the committees. Some of them are already existing, and then some of them are new. So if you're interested in joining any of the committees, we'll be sending out an email after this meeting requesting volunteers. And I really encourage you all to sign up. It's a great way to get involved, and we have a good variety of different committees. So depending on kind of what your interest area is, hopefully there's something that fits what you want to be doing. So I'm just going to quickly kind of go over what each of the committees are, what their purpose is, and what their functions are going to be. Just so you guys can get a better idea. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So the first committee is actually a brand new committee, and it's our Caregiver Committee. And this committee is going to serve as an opportunity for our informal caregivers to share resources and provide tips for caregiving to other informal caregivers. And members will be able to provide suggestions and feedback to our executive committee on how to better improve the VCC for informal caregivers. So hopefully we'll have some people interested in that, but nobody really knows caregiving better than caregivers themselves. So we felt like that would be a good opportunity for you guys to share, some tips and tricks to caregiving in an environment that's maybe a little bit more comfortable than the general overall group setting. The next committee is our Education and Program Committee. This is already an existing committee, and this group basically will strive to increase the general public's knowledge of caregiving issues and concerns, and will also focus on increasing healthcare providers' knowledge of the caregiver experience. So members' responsibilities will include assisting the Education Committee Chair, which is Donna, on developing educational presentation topics, as well as reviewing presentation survey feedback, which I realized I totally forgot to introduce. We are doing a new survey, which we will put out after each meeting. And I think Juliana will go ahead and put that link in the chat for you all. And it's just a way for you guys to evaluate our educational presentations that this committee will be coming up with, as well as potentially give suggestions for future topics as well. And then the final committee is our Outreach Committee. So this is kind of a newly improved committee. So it had existed before, but we kind of enhanced it. And so what this group will do is strive to increase awareness about the VCC to the general public. So members' responsibilities will include providing feedback on marketing materials that we develop, such as brochures, flyers, or proclamations, distributing marketing materials among their already existing networks. So that's important, is that we're not asking anything above and beyond maybe what you're already doing in your current job. So basically just distributing those marketing materials with your existing networks, and then also assisting with some feedback on grant deliverables related to our Virginia Lifespan Respite Voucher Program grant. So hopefully you guys will potentially be interested in that committee, because it's a little bit new, but hopefully it'll just kind of build off of maybe some positions or, things that you guys are already doing out in the community. And then the final opportunity is not necessarily a committee. What it is it's our membership liaison. So this individual will actually be joining our executive committee, and what they're going to be doing is seeking to strengthen and expand partnerships and collaboration among stakeholders, resulting in coordinated efforts to support caregivers. So essentially the membership liaison responsibilities will include maintaining our current membership list, welcoming any new members that we might have, and then also just serving as that central point of contact for members between the executive committee and the members themselves. So hopefully you guys will all consider becoming more involved with the VCC through these committees. We really encourage you all to sign up and, see if maybe it is for you. And yeah, does anybody have any questions about those 3 committees, as well as the liaison position?
Emily, would you put the names of those committees in you don't have to give all the details again, but just put the names of the committees into the chat?
Of course, yes, definitely, I can do that.
Can you explain the time commitment?
Yes. So essentially, particularly with the liaison position, they would join our executive committee. So we meet on our off months from our normal general body meetings. So basically, you would be committing to one meeting a month. And I assume we hadn't particularly, nailed out all of the details with each of the committees, but I think it would kind of be along the same realms of they would probably meet in the off months from when our general body meets. So essentially it would be like a every other month meeting sort of commitment. And we don't want it to add anything to what you're already doing. We're just hoping, that people will naturally kind of gravitate towards one committee or another based on, the roles that they currently have. So hopefully it wouldn't be too much of a time commitment. So I would say, estimated about maybe like a 1 to 1.5 hour meeting every other month, and then maybe some little odds and end things there. And then of course, with the liaison position, anytime we would have a new member, we would just ask that that person would maybe just call and introduce themselves and welcome that person to the VCC. But that would be the only thing really above and beyond that.
I don't think it'd be more than a couple hours a week
Ye-
here and
yeah,
there.
yeah, if that. Any other questions?
Also, when the committees are formed, typically there's a chair to each committee, and they would also be part of the executive committee as well.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Well, hopefully you guys will join. We encourage you to do that. And I'll just now be turning it over to Donna to introduce our speaker for today.
I'm off mute, right? Okay. So just about every year, we do a General Assembly update so that you all are aware of the legislation that's coming down the pike that may or may not affect you personally or professionally. This year is a short session of the General Assembly, and DARS has invited, or we have invited Charlotte Arbogast to speak to us today. She is with the Policy Division at the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. She serves as a senior policy analyst and regulatory coordinator. So Charlotte, I'm going to turn it over to you for the 2023 General Assembly update.
Good morning. Thank you, Donna. Can everyone hear me? Great. Well, I'm glad to be here. As Donna mentioned, I work in policy, and so we've been very busy the last few weeks as General Assembly's been getting underway. And I also staff the Commonwealth Council on Aging, which met yesterday. So bear with me as I go through this presentation. I did want to start the presentation with something a little bit lighthearted and hopefully fun. And I hope we all are familiar and enjoy the Schoolhouse Rocks video. And I think, let me try that again. Which still holds true in a lot of ways today. So.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this.
Is the sound okay?
Capitol building.
I can't hear you guys, sorry. Can someone say verbally?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
In Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be alone. How I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm gonna live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be alone. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
I hope that evokes childhood memories for you. Like,
I love that, Charlotte. It was so fun. And I want to say that the little guy that was with the bill looks like a little, Where's Waldo?
yeah, with especially with the shirt.
Mhm.
Okay, let me close that and then. Okay, so when Nick and Donna invited me this week, we put together these objectives. So I hope to explain a little bit about the General Assembly, legislative and budget process. We can talk a bit about some legislation that's before the General Assembly this year and give you some tips on how to engage in advocacy with your state legislator. And when I'm presenting from home, Nick and Donna, I can't see the chat or anything. So just let me know if anybody has any questions or if their hands up and we can stop and address those. Okay. So what the Schoolhouse Rocks video goes over is like the federal level of how a bill becomes a law, as does this chart or this graphic that you have on your slide now. But it's very similar in a lot of ways to the General Assembly. So what you heard is bills either introduced in both one side or both sides of the House or the Senate. It has to go through committees and then be voted on by the full House and Senate. Then it goes over to the respective chamber and starts all over again before it goes to the president, or in Virginia, the governor, which has an opportunity to veto it or make changes. So that's kind of the overall gist. Hopefully we will remember a little bit of this from our civics and classes in high school. In Virginia government, like federal government, we have three branches: the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Right now, the legislative branch is meeting in the Pocahontas building rather than the former General Assembly building because they are rebuilding. They demolished the old GAB, they're building a new one. They had hoped to be back in the new building this year for session, but they ran into some delays with construction and technology equipment. So by next year, they'll be back in the General Assembly building after being in the Pocahontas building for several years. That's where the legislative offices are, where committee meetings happen. And then when they go into floor session, that meets obviously in the chambers of the Capitol building, which is also where the offices of the governor are, and then the Patrick Henry building or Old Town Hall downtown. In the legislative branch in Virginia, the General Assembly is said to be the oldest legislature in the Western Hemisphere when it started as the House of Burgesses, also speaking back to our K through 12 Virginia government classes. Virginia has a part-time legislature, meaning it doesn't meet the whole year. There are some states in the country where the legislature is a full-time legislature. In Virginia, we are very beholden to tradition, and we are said to have liked the part-time legislature as it was envisioned because it gave opportunities for people who are really embedded in their communities to serve in government without making that full-time commitment. I don't know any stats on this, but anecdotally, I think there are some people who say that this leads to a variety of professions in the General Assembly. We have folks from the medical community, pharmacists, physicians, nurse practitioners. We have lawyers, which is probably the most common, but we also have business owners and farmers, and then some teachers as well. So it does present an opportunity to hear from a variety of perspectives. In Virginia, the legislative branch meets in odd number years for 46 days, and then in even number years for 60 days. So this is a short session, as Donna mentioned. And that being said, it might be short, but it's still high volume in terms of the number of bills that are being introduced and being considered. So about 2,000 bills will be introduced for consideration this year. And then in even number years, it's up to 3,000. So there's a lot of activity to get done in this short amount of time. To kind of help process some of that work, the rules of each body, the House and the Senate, they'll set bill limits so that there isn't an unlimited necessarily number of bills to consider. This helps kind of make sure that legislators prioritize what bills they really want to focus on for the year. There were some bills that were filed last year in an even number session that were carried over to this session. Most of those have been dealt with. Usually they end up dying, but it is a potential opportunity for some bills where maybe you want to work a little bit more on negotiating the final bill and keep it alive and bring it back the following year. This year, there is not an opportunity to carry over bills, though. Right now in the legislative branch, we have the House of Delegates, which would be comparable to the House of Representatives at the federal level, with 100 members. The Republicans currently have control of the House of Delegates, and they've elected Speaker Todd Gilbert to preside over that. In the House, when there is a tie vote, the bill fails. That's part of their organizing rules. In the Senate, there are 40 members, 22 Democrats and 18 Republicans. So Democrats have an overall majority in the Senate. However, the Lieutenant Governor, who's a Republican right now, Winsome Sears, she presides over the Senate. And when there is a tie, she casts that tie-breaking vote. I want to take a moment here to just also further reiterate that public policy is reflected in a variety of ways. It's not just through laws that go through the General Assembly, but there are other mechanisms where public policy is created, developed, enforced, etc. So laws that go through the General Assembly are ultimately put in the Code of Virginia. So a statute or a law has the same different terms, same meaning. Those are bills that have gone through the General Assembly and been enacted by the General Assembly. Then separately, we have the Virginia Administrative Code, which are what we would colloquially call regulations or rules. These are a little bit tend to be more detailed. So a law might be that the agency should develop regulations to implement nursing home staffing standards. And then the agencies would go through the Administrative Process Act to promulgate regulations that lay that out. The key takeaway here is laws and regulations have the same effect. So one is a little bit more elevated in terms of the process, but at the end of the day, they both have the force of law behind them. That's a little bit different than traditional government agency policies, practices, or guidance documents. These are generally speaking non-enforceable documents that maybe provide a little bit more further detail to regulated entities about how they can comply with the law. So this could be, for example, like the regulation spells out that individuals must submit an application to get licensed. And the guidance document might kind of spell out like what's in the application that they're going to fill out and how to fill out the application. But those are important practices in terms of the day-to-day operation of public policy. In addition, we have judicial case law. So any number of the things I've previously mentioned can be challenged in the courts usually. And so when those courts make decisions that also set precedent or identify the court's understanding and application of a law or regulation, and that becomes part of the public policy sphere as well. And then lastly, the budget. You can have all the laws you want on the books, and if they require money to do them, then that is a public policy decision whether you fund them or not. In addition, the budget tends to have in Virginia, it tends to have some operating guidelines or other additional requirements. So it's not always just strictly the money items that are in the budget. There could be studies, reports, further requirements for agencies or organizations. So all of these taken together really do form the full picture of public policy. So the General Assembly is an important part, but it's not the only part of this process. As I mentioned in Schoolhouse Rocks, bill ideas or budget amendments or ideas come from a variety of places. They can come from legislators, special interest groups or organizations like provider associations, AARP Virginia, a number of sort of groups like that. They can come from a constituent who approaches their legislator. Government agencies often have, are asked to identify potential bills or legislation that would be helpful for them. There are reports that are completed. Those reports could be state agency reports that are submitted to the General Assembly in the year prior, or there are legislative committees like the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission, JLARC, or the Joint Commission on Healthcare that complete a number of studies, and they report on the findings of those studies and also identify policy options or recommendations for legislators. So, there are a lot of ways that bill and budget ideas can come to be introduced in the General Assembly. And the last one I would say is it's okay for you to have a budget idea or a bill idea and talk to your legislator about it. So yeah, a lot of different avenues for this. Bills that are introduced into the General Assembly go first through committee, and they may also go to a subcommittee. In the House of Delegates, there are these committees on the 14 standing committees, and the Senate of Virginia has 11 standing committees. Typically, where you would see caregiving related bills or aging and disability related bills. On the House side, they would probably be most found in health, welfare, and institutions, or HWI. And then on the Senate side, it could be in Senate Education and Health or Senate Rehabilitation and Social Services. Those are generally speaking where we see bills. However, if you're interested in guardianship, for example, that would probably be in courts of justice and the judiciary branches. If you're interested in commissions like the Alzheimer's Commission, those would likely go through Senate and House of Delegates, the Standing Committee for Rules. So there are some gradations here. In addition, what I would say is any bill that is deemed to have a cost impact to implement, when it goes from its standing sort of content assigned committee, it will be referred to the respective money committee. And on the House of Delegates side, the money committee would be House Appropriation. And then on the Senate side, it's Senate Finance and Appropriation. And so a bill that has some cost to it not only has to survive subcommittee, has to survive the standing committee, and then has to survive Finance and Appropriations or House Appropriations before it even makes it to the floor. So there are a lot of opportunities for bills to be discussed and heard in this process, but it moves very quickly. And so it's really important to keep track of any particular issue you feel passionate about.
Charlotte, can I interrupt you a second before you move on?
Yeah.
I mean, is that okay?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
If I'm a consumer or a citizen of Virginia and I really, want, and I have some support for a bill or a law that I would like to see enacted or something, do I need to know about what these committees or which one committee it might be heard in, or do I contact a legislator? What would my first step be as an advocate for my issue, whatever that may be?
So what I would say to you is this. I think a lot of people mistakenly wait until the General Assembly is in session to advocate. And that's tends to be a difficult process because there's a lot happening. They're very busy. The schedules are jam-packed. And so usually if you're waiting to engage a legislator at that point, like, you're not going to get a lot of time on their schedule. You might even not get on their schedule at all. You'd be talking to their legislative aide. So what I suggest to people is to start in the summer and the fall, and when your representative is in your community, and meet with them in your community as a constituent. You don't generally a layperson doesn't necessarily need to know all the nuances about the issue or the committees and all of this. It does potentially help in terms of, laying something out for a legislator, like in a package with a bow, but it doesn't have to be done that way. Especially if you start early and you start often, I guess, or you engage often. And so, yes, I think you can present your idea just to a legislator in general, but it does help to do a little bit of research into the issue, but you don't have to necessarily know all of the committee work. If, for example, the legislator ended up picking up your issue and introducing legislation, usually their legislative aide would work with you to keep you abreast of that and how it's moving through the process and opportunities for you to provide public comment during some of these committee meetings. But also it's kind of helpful if you're following it yourself. So if you have a bill idea that makes it to the bill process, I would definitely try to be plugged in as possible. And if you need more information about that, like, try to reach out to the legislative aide before the session starts so that they can kind of give you some of their own tips and tricks. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much. I just didn't even know where to tell someone to start. So that's very helpful. Yes. One benefit that we've seen coming, particularly out of the pandemic, is an increasing ability to stream committee and subcommittee meetings in the General Assembly, and potentially to provide public comment virtually. So that's really exciting. When I started this work, we almost always, I would say, guaranteed you could see the full committee on a streaming, but most subcommittees were not streamed. And so now most subcommittees are streamed, so you can watch them from the comfort of your home. And then in some cases, you can sign up to provide virtual comment in advance of the committee or subcommittee convening. And then all of these are generally recorded and posted online for a period of time. So if you miss a committee meeting, you were interested in a bill that maybe was heard yesterday, you oftentimes can go back and try to watch that committee online. When you're watching a committee, this is the general protocol. So the patron will present the bill, introduce maybe the concept, why they picked it. The committee members will then potentially ask the patron questions, or depending on availability, if it deals with an agency, usually agency staff are there and can maybe answer some technical questions. Or if the agency has been authorized to have a position on the bill, they may offer that as well. Then the committee will hear from supporters and opponents of the bill. Generally speaking, because like I said, there's such a high volume of bills going through the General Assembly, this is time limited, and it can vary in terms of how much time people are provided. I've seen, most common, I would say you see 3 to 5 minutes for public comment per bill, and that would be split between supporters and opponents. Unless there's a bill that gets discussed at length, then that's kind of what's available at that time. So that's why it's also really important to reach out in advance and in other ways beyond just that public comment opportunity. The committee members will then discuss the bill and they will vote on the bill. So this little slide, I tried to color code it to show how few options a bill has to make it out of committee, which you hear a lot in the Schoolhouse Rocks and is still very true. So these are the actions that a committee or a subcommittee can take on a piece of legislation. The ones in red: fail to report, no action taken, pass by indefinitely, and strike. Those would all essentially mean that your bill is dead. That the bill is dead. A
carried over, which I mentioned earlier in my presentation, and incorporate are sort of quasi like alive bills. So carried over would mean it's alive until the next year. And incorporate means that one of your bill or one bill has maybe been assumed under another bill. They do this sometimes if there are similar bills working through the process to just kind of start to streamline the bills that have to keep moving forward. So those are kind of like quasi-alive bills, but the only one on the slide that actually means your bill has like fully made it out of committee is when you report it. And a bill can be reported in 3 ways: without amendments, with amendments, or with amendments in the nature of a substitute. So what that last one means is if there are a significant amount of amendments made to a bill or certain types of amendments made to a bill, then what Division of Legislative Services do is they'll just generate a substitute bill that would replace the one that was introduced as the bill moving forward. And like I said, if the bill has a cost associated to it, it can be reported and then referred to one of those money committees for additional review. After a bill makes it out of committee, it goes to the chamber. So if it was introduced on the House side, it would go to the House chamber. A bill in the General Assembly is read 3 times before it actually is voted on. The first time it's just read by the clerk and acknowledged and then put on the calendar. During the second reading, that's when you tend to see the most debate or discussion about a bill. And that's usually reserved for the opportunity to discuss or debate the bill. And then by the third reading, that would be when the vote happens. Usually these happen like separate days, but sometimes as bills are getting like down to the wire, those readings happen or like can be done within the scope of 1 day. If your bill is passed out of the chamber, it was introduced, then it would go over to the other side and start all over again. If it's passed out of both chambers, then you'll see where it's termed an enrolled bill, where it's sent to the governor for action. And then all signed legislation becomes a chapter in the Acts of Assembly for that year. These are just like common terms you might see. I was hoping to kind of like make them less intimidating. So here are a couple of caveats with that. If you had a bill, sometimes for strategy purposes, stakeholders will ask a patron on the House to introduce the same bill that they ask a senator to introduce on the Senate. That gives you an opportunity to potentially keep one alive through the process if one of them doesn't make it. If you have like similar bills or those same bills get amended on the House or the Senate side, and you end up with 2 versions of the bill, then they'll form a conference committee of a select number of members to negotiate which is the final version of the bill to move forward. Once that negotiation happens, the bill has to go back out to those same House and Senate to be re-voted on. So there's a lot of happening there. In Virginia, the governor has 4 choices with bills that come on across his or her desk. First, they can sign the bill as passed. Second, they can change the bill. So the governor in Virginia has a lot of power with regards to a line item veto. So the governor can line item veto bills, so he can make changes or amendments to the bill itself and then send it back. He or she can also do that with the budget. So that's some other sort of state governments, you can only decide yes or no to a bill or a budget. Here in Virginia, they can make those line item changes. If they do make changes to a bill and they send it back, it has to be passed again by both chambers before it becomes a law. The third option is if the governor vetoes the bill, then that requires a 2/3 vote of both chambers to override it. After the General Assembly adjourns at the end of February this year, I believe it's April 12th, and April is what we call the veto session. That's when they all come back to town, and that any bills that the governor has vetoed following the end of session, that would be the opportunity if they wanted to try to override the veto. You typically don't see this in states unless you have a legislature that's controlled by one party and a governor's office that's controlled by a separate party. And when there's an opportunity, like when they would have enough votes to override the governor's veto. Lastly, the governor can, if he or she takes no action, then it becomes a law. We don't really see this in Virginia, but that is potentially an option. This is a little bit different than what you heard on Schoolhouse Rock regarding the federal government. Conversely, if the president takes no action on a law, then it sits there. So it's a little bit different than the federal government. So I want to provide some context, and Schoolhouse Rock alludes to the difficult road that a bill has to become a law. I would say it's become increasingly difficult in Congress over the last 15 to 20 years. So just for context, in 2019, about 8,800 bills and resolutions were introduced. That volume is a little bit more than there were in 2017. Usually you see that when parties are shifting around and there's been, a significant new introduction of members that want to introduce bills. Most bills in the Congress are introduced on the House, which would be the same thing in the General Assembly. When you have more members, that just tends to be the case. But in 2019, only 105 of those bills were enacted, which is pretty low, and compares to 72 in 2013 and 81 in 2011. So very improbable that your bill in Congress is going to make it, and most bills never make it past committee. So it is a challenging road. I will say on the optimistic side, depending on where your passion for a bill falls. In the General Assembly last year, which was a long session, there were about 3,100 bills introduced and 807 were ultimately approved. Now, I would say a portion of that 807 are commending resolutions, recognizing an entity or a person for good work done, or celebrating the life, like in memoriam bills. But still, it's a much bigger chance of making a bill, having a bill survive in the General Assembly. And of those that didn't pass, 1,100 failed, and 33 were vetoed by the governor. And none of those vetoes were overridden. As I mentioned, the budget is a really important part of this process as well. And it kind of operates on a parallel track as the legislation. So leading, and that process starts well before the General Assembly. So each year in the summer, the governor, through the Department of Planning and Budget, will work with agencies and give them instructions for how to develop their proposed budgets for the upcoming General Assembly. That could be instructions like during the recession. Sometimes those instructions were 5% budget reduction, and you got to figure out how to do it. And agencies were directed to identify ways to make that cut. Sometimes it's, there's an increase, or more likely than not, the governor's identified certain priorities that he or she wants to work on in an administration. And those will be directed to the agencies to how they can maybe support those priorities. The governor technically develops the budget, but then it is introduced in each house by a legislator on behalf of the governor, and it becomes kind of the budget bill. In even number years, we do a full budget, and then in odd numbered years, we do budget amendments. So last year in 2022, the General Assembly enacted a 2-year biennial budget. And this year in 2023, we are considering amendments to the second year of that biennial budget. So that's where we are in the process. The federal government is intended to operate on an annual budget process. However, as you might have heard from the news, we've been operating for many years on what are called continuing resolutions, which are sort of budget agreements that are negotiated that last a period of months into the future and then have to be renegotiated. States have to have balanced budgets. That's not the case at the federal level, but we have to have a balanced budget in Virginia at the end of the day. I will say yesterday, the budget amendments, so the governor introduced his budget amendments in December and unveiled those. And then the budget bill was introduced by legislators on his behalf. And what came out yesterday were House and Senate member budget amendments. So in addition to the governor's proposed amendments to the biennial budget, House and Senate members can also propose amendments to the budget. And those came out yesterday about midday. And so those will start to also be considered in the budget process. Is there a question in the chat? Anyone? Okay. Okay. This website is the generalassembly.gov, virginiageneralassembly.gov. You can find a lot of information here about your legislators. The Capital Classroom tab is really helpful in understanding some of this process stuff as well. So I'd encourage you to check that out. If you're interested in a specific bill, then LIS is where you want to be. And you can track bills by their number that's assigned, by the member who introduced them, by the committee they've been assigned. The meetings tab icon here will show you when the committee meetings and subcommittees are happening. The daily floor calendars are your guide to what's being heard in the chambers each day. So yeah, it's a fast moving process. So just want to make you aware, and you can explore these as you're interested. If you were to click on this tab here for the state budget, it would take you to this page. So what you would see today is the budget bill tab would show you what the governor's introduced budget, his proposed budget is with his amendments. The budget amendments here in the middle tab will show you the House of Delegate member amendments, and then the Senate member amendment. You can usually search those by agency head, by member. I can't remember. There's a third way you can search them. We usually typically search by agency that we're interested in, that we know deals with aging, disability, or caregiving. As those amendments are getting worked out, you will see the third tab, the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance and Appropriation Committee will release their committee reports. Just like with a bill that comes out that's very different and you have to form a conference committee, the same thing will ultimately happen with the budget. A conference committee made up of members of the House and the Senate will come together and hash out their proposal, their negotiated compromise from the House budget and the Senate budget. And then that conference report will then go back to the chambers for voting. I wanted to just also make you aware, this is a really helpful resource. Also on the LIS page, reports to the General Assembly. Sometimes if you're looking for, where did this bill come about? I'm curious about it. Sometimes there might have been a study, the previous year by an agency, or like I said, the legislative commissions that have looked at a topic. And so this can be a helpful tool to kind of find out like what the origin or the history of the issue is. So I'm leading, in preparing for this presentation, I looked at some current bills that dealt with caregiving. In the past years, you may have heard some conversations about the family caregiver tax credit. That bill does not appear to be in the session this year. It looks like there are about two that deal with family leave. The first one you see here is kind of a technical bill. I didn't know much about it, but I was able to catch it in a subcommittee earlier this week. And so they're basically making some changes to insurance law to allow agents to sell family private leave insurance. This is a kind of a new line of insurance that sometimes could be offered for by employers for employees. And so they were just kind of they had created this allowance last year. And then as they were implementing it this year, they realized they needed to make some tweaks to the law. And so that's what this first one was an attempt to do. The second one is to establish a paid family and medical leave program through the Virginia Employment Commission. And so this could potentially provide opportunity for family and medical leave to people who don't otherwise have access to it. I think, some of us may be familiar with FMLA or the Family Medical Leave Act at the national level, but not a lot of employees, or there's a big chunk of employees who don't have access to FMLA. And so this would provide potentially an alternative option for those folks. So here's my contact information. I'm gonna leave that up a little bit. And Donna asked me to kind of talk to you a little bit about tips for talking with legislators. So the first one, like I said, is, reaching out before the General Assembly is really good strategy. So that would be when I would advise you to start making contact. If you're going to meet with a legislator, it's helpful sometimes to find out, like if you or your legislator maybe in your area, to find out what committees they're on, what bills they may be sponsored in the last General Assembly session. So this way you can kind of make some connections and tie in to like your specific issue. That might be helpful. Also, you can check out their website and see what topics or legislative issues that they're interested in working on. When you come to a meeting with a legislator or their aide, it does help to bring handouts or visually appealing materials. Try to avoid long documents that or really thick reports, because they're probably not going to have time to read that. So if you have summaries or short engaging materials, that would be really helpful. Also, if you're talking to a legislator about a specific bill, bring a copy of that. And usually it's helpful to staple or somehow attach like your recommendations or your position on that bill with it so that they have it all together in one place. Try to be on time, be courteous, introduce yourself, explain why the topic is interesting to you. If it's personal, tell a story, but be concise and aware of time, especially as you're getting closer into the General Assembly session. Make a clear request. If you're not sure about a specific, sort of bill or budget, try to focus on educating the individual and raising awareness about your issue, whether that's aging or disability or caregiving. Just trying to make them a little bit aware of what you're experiencing. If the legislator asks you a question and you can't answer it, don't guess. Just to say, that's a good question. Let me research that and get back to you. That's the best way to provide an accurate answer, even if it takes a little bit longer. And then when after your meeting, you've met with them, it's suggested that maybe you send a follow-up email or a handwritten note, thank them for their time, remind them about what you're interested in. If you had follow-up information you were going to give them, include that. And then after each session, you can always follow up with your legislator, try to start gauging with them regularly, a couple of times a year. So they get to know you and they understand, how, what you're interested in and what topics you're following. So those are a few little additional tricks and tips that I have. I do have some, there are some other aging and disability legislation that's working through that we can chat about if you want. So I'll kind of leave it open-ended at this point, Emily.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Charlotte or anything that they would like to discuss or ask her?
Well, Emily, are you okay if I make a follow-up to what was in the chat?
Yeah, of course.
So Charlotte, I really thank you. That was fabulous. Oh my gosh, thank you. I feel like I need this kind of training and education regularly. So a couple of things Emily did a great job answering this, so thank you. It had just come to my attention this morning about a House bill and a Senate bill, both around dementia, the House Bill 2250. These are both patrons that support District 1 here where I am in Williamsburg, but one on dementia education for police. And so Emily says that one hasn't been assigned a subcommittee yet. And the second one is Monty Mason and Senate Bill 952. I don't remember the Alzheimer's Disease Commission, if it's just the ability to extend it, is probably what that is. But Emily says that's on the docket for tomorrow under the Committee on Rules.
Yes. So during there are a number of commissions that exist, but they have what we call sunset clauses on them, meaning they have to be renewed every few years in order to continue to exist. This is sometimes, the rationale behind this is to sometimes make sure that commissions don't exist in perpetuity if there isn't an ongoing reason for them. So the Alzheimer's Disease and Related Disorders Commission does have a sunset. So this bill would extend that sunset. In addition, it would add some ex officio members to the commission's structure, these being a representative from DMAS, DBHCS, DSS, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Let me pull, I can.
That's okay. That's really helpful, Charlotte. Thank you. And I just put a link in there. I know Krista's on from Virginia Navigator, but they have a great summary of the CARE Act. So if you aren't familiar with it, it's something that I think George Worthington and I maybe presented to this group a year or two ago with AARP. I still try to monitor it. So if you all have more information, I'd love to know, but that was signed in 2015. And from a healthcare system that I sit in, we're not doing a lot with it. And so it's an unfunded mandate. It's saying, here are the things that you need to do to support an adult or older adult and their family caregiver when they're in the hospital, including providing them with instruction and hands-on demonstration of the care they might need to provide when they go home. And because it's not a part of hospital surveys and other regulatory bodies that come in yet, I'm just not seeing among healthcare systems in the state a lot of movement on it. There's a lot of potential. I mean, it makes sense, but if anybody else has updates on what in other healthcare systems and how they're moving forward with the CARE Act, I'd love to hear about that, because we were one of the first adopters, Virginia, a very early adopter in 2015. And I just, it's got such potential, but there's no real dollars behind it. So sitting in a healthcare system and thinking, oh my gosh, this makes great sense, but we don't have enough team members even to provide the basic pieces to make all this happen right now with the shortages in healthcare.
Yeah, I would say that kind of mirrors what I understand about the status of that too. And having been a caregiver for my aunt post-hospital discharge, I can speak to the overwhelming feeling you can have if you're sent home with somebody who has complicated health conditions that you're now helping with. It looks like there's another question in the chat about the auxiliary grant. So the Joint Commission on Healthcare studied the auxiliary grant, and they studied the affordability of assisted living facilities this past fall. They identified a few policy options related to that. And one of those policy options was to increase the auxiliary grant rate to $2,500. That'd be the standard rate. There's a Northern Virginia differential that would be 15% higher than that. The Joint Commission did vote to endorse increasing the auxiliary grant rate. And so we are expecting, there should be a budget amendment. I'm not sure. I wasn't staffing the Commonwealth Council on Aging yesterday here. And so I haven't looked through all the budget amendments, but there is a budget amendment to fund that. So we will see where that goes. In addition, there is some legislation to expand the auxiliary grant to a new sort of setting that hasn't previously been included. This would be for older adults in particular who live in the community. Maybe they live with a family member or they live in an independent, housing situation, but they need some help with IADLs or ADLs to help them stay in the community. That legislation has been introduced, and it would direct DARS to basically develop that program and implement it for with an initial cap of 200 individuals to see how that goes. And the auxiliary grant, we would have to get Social Security Administration approval because we are subject to their requirements for auxiliary grant program as well. So.
Any other questions for Charlotte?
Who would that program fall under if they look at moving it to the community? I'm sorry, I just kind of jumped in as opposed to putting it in chat.
That's okay, or that's okay with me at least. So what DARS oversees the auxiliary grant program. We have the regulations and we have the auxiliary grant manual. That being said, for the supportive housing setting that already exists, DBHDS is responsible for certifying those providers because they're CSB, Community Services Boards, that are already in their network. For this new setting, it would be implemented, it would be again overseen by DARS and implemented through the local departments of social services. It was kind of talked about in a little bit in tandem as kind of like a blend of adult foster care, which is offered in some localities through local departments of social services, and then the local Department of Social Services in-home services. So there is a small pot of money for local departments to provide in-home services to individuals, and those in-home services are companion, chore, and homemaker services. And so this would kind of be a blend of those concepts through the auxiliary grant program.
Anything else for Charlotte?
Thank you.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Charlotte, so much for giving that presentation. It was definitely super informative. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. So before we end the meeting, I just wanted to take a moment to put the survey in the chat and kind of reiterate that we really are looking for your feedback on our educational presentations, like what Charlotte just gave, and just to try to learn, about how we can maybe improve, what you guys like, what you guys maybe don't like, because we really do want to be bringing in speakers and educational presentations that you guys see as valuable in whatever line of work or caregiving situation that you might find yourself in. So please fill out the survey. I put it in the chat. We'll also be sending the link in the follow-up email, as well as information on the committees. And I even had a few of you who were already messaging me in the chat about wanting to join some of the committees. So I'm very excited to hear that. And I hope we'll have even more of you wanting to be involved in the future. So thank you for coming today, and please make sure to join us for all of our meetings in 2023. There are hyperlinks for the Zoom registration for all the year's meetings at the bottom of each meeting flyer that goes out, and on the meeting schedule that is sent out with it. So if you can register for all of our meetings next year and then go ahead and get them on your calendar now, that would be awesome. That way know what to expect and when our meetings are occurring. And I hope you guys will join us in March for our next meeting.
Okay. All right, everybody. It's been nice having you for the first meeting of the year, and we'll see you next time.